Thanks for that great talk, Roxanne, and I think I'll touch on some things that have some relation to that. So my name is Emily Drabinski. I'm the coordinator of library instruction at Long Island University, Brooklyn, home of the Blackbirds. And I'm here to talk about, it's so nice to have a comrade in the room, the fellow squawk. All right, so I am here to talk about what we can do about the problems we've spent the last day and a half outlining and defining in 20 minutes. What do we do? What can we do? This is the question that dogs me. I'm not usually a prescriptive person. If you know me in real life, or if you've read things that I've written, you'll notice that I'm also almost aggressively resistant to the demand for answers. I agree with David James Hudson, who quite convincingly argues in our field that the demand that scholars and practitioners be practical and solve problems is in fact a way of narrowing the work that we do, of focusing us on the tasks at hand instead of struggling with and against why those particular tasks and why those particular hands. And yet, I think we're at a moment in the history of capitalism and resistance to it that we're due for some how-to conversations that address the problem of power and why they have it and why we don't. Or more generously, what power they have and what power we have, and how to build both the power and who counts in the we. So I can't pretend to know the answers to these questions, but I think they're critical ones for us to be asking right now. I am hopeful that this event, how many of you were surprised that this event was happening? And others, and I look all over the library landscape and I can't believe the things that are happening now that were not happening 15 years ago when I went to library school. I'm hopeful that these events will help make conversations around the kinds of questions about power and labor mainstream and common ones. So I'll be talking today from some very new and I'll acknowledge a very shallow experience as an organizer. In September 2016, I was locked out by my employer along with the rest of the faculty at LIU Brooklyn, including my comrade Eamon Toole, who's here too. We were at the end of the contract negotiations when management decided that rather than continue to negotiate in good faith with us toward a compromise that would give both parties something of what they needed and set the ground for the next round of bargaining, that they would rather fire all of us en masse. Welcome home. I'm in my 10th year at LIU Brooklyn. I was talking to Sandy at lunch, approaching 10 years at Missouri, and yeah, I'm spending my life here. My life, right? Anyway, they forced us to sign this contract through their big show of power. For me, being on the receiving end of that kind of force, it changed the way I look at and think about the world, its problems, and what the potential solutions might be. Whatever analysis I might have had before then, and it was shallow and ill-informed probably, was instantly replaced with material facts on the ground. There's an abstract analysis or understanding of the world that suggests that workers are interchangeable and disposable under capitalism, right? You could read about it in a book. And then there's watching your employer effectively fire teachers who have given decades to a place. I helped a guy sign up for health insurance who had spent 60 years at LIU Brooklyn, right? Replacing them with $10 an hour scabs from Monster.com. That idea you might have had about what adjunctification means for higher education suddenly means something super duper real. Colleagues with end-stage cancer unable to see their doctors because management has cut off both their paychecks and their health insurance. Super duper real. The experience of the lockout changed me in some fundamental ways, and one of those ways was a newly urgent sense that if we aren't talking about what we're going to do about the slow fires burning around us, then maybe we shouldn't be talking at all. And I don't know if Eamon feels this way, but like I can't hear a conversation about what we ought to do without hearing it through an organizing lens. Yeah. And it was interesting to hear Eamon talk and how, you know, we actually don't see each other that often because we have these faculty jobs and stuff, but like listening to the way his analysis this morning aligns with mine, because I think we learned some of the really similar lessons through that time. Anyway, it's been harder for me to read, think, and talk about either the tasks or the structures that put those tasks in front of us without an accompanying analysis for how we might make those things different. So what are we going to do? So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to offer some ideas about what I think we should do. It's going to be pretty quotidian, and maybe you'll wonder why I'm not applying the theories of Max Weber to librarianship, right? Like I wrote the abstract, and then I went back and looked at the abstract, and I was like, oh, I should Google power. Like, oh. And Max Weber apparently talks about power, but I've got a lot to do. Anyway, so other people will be better at that than me, and I value their work, but it's not mine right now. So what I would like to share a few tips and tricks, top trends, and innovations that address how we conceptualized and built power during the lockout at LIU. There isn't anything new in any of this, and I'm profoundly a beginner and a novice. And I hope that you'll share what you know from your own movement work or your work in your workplaces, so that we can learn to build this toolkit, right? Everybody's always building a toolkit, or we can make a LibGuide out of it. But I can't think of a more urgent project than learning together and making common knowledge strategies for building and deploying power. This is us. I made these slides and then I forgot the order. Sorry. Okay. So I want to start by talking briefly about what I mean when I talk about power. One thing I think we learned during the lockout of faculty at LAU Brooklyn was that power is a real thing that can be used against you. Many of us in this room are not normally subject to brute power, right? I wasn't until this moment. We move through the world easily. The world likes us and wants us to be here, right? It facilitates me by putting ramen across the street. Not everybody that I can afford, right? Not everybody lives a life like that. And for many of us, that illusion has already been or will be shattered at some point. Most of the time, I work collegially with my colleagues in university administration. We meet, we make strategic plans, we report about things, we work together at the university, we do the work of the university. During the lockout, the stark fact of power and how it enabled the lives and work of some of us and not others was made clear. Management had the capacity to pay me or to not pay me, to provide me health coverage or to not provide me health coverage, absent basic protections from the state. So every time I write that down, I'm like, I shouldn't rely on my employer for those things, but I do. It's like another conference, right? So absent those basic protections from the state, I rely on my employer to enable me to pay rent and survive in my body, right? They're like in charge of that. It's like deep. I can't keep management from enjoying those things. The power to withhold material necessities from me is immense, and Capital has that power, right? I can't keep the president of the university from having her job. I mean, maybe I can, but we weren't able to, so anyway. And Capital also has the backing of the state. Over and over again, during and after the lockout, people would ask me if it was legal. Is it legal to file all of your workers in order to compel them to accept a bad contract? It actually is. It is legal. Is it legal to lock out your employees and cancel health insurance effective immediately for an employee who is on the verge of giving birth? Yes. Yes, totally legal. Had we failed to ratify the final contract, could management really have just imposed it on us and forced us to work under its conditions without the protection of a union or the mandate that we ever come back into the room to bargain conditions again? Could they really do that? Absolutely. Like, you bet. Capital has power that is vested in it by the state. The two of them are working together and not necessarily for us. So this was the power that they had. But what was the power that we had? What was it made of? And this became a central question for me during the lockout and contract fight and continues to really dog me. How can we resist when Capital decides to steamroll us, and what does our power look like? And I'm going to say something that sounds cheesy and sentimental, right? It's a little bit cheesy. But I also think it's hardcore and fierce if we think about it in the right kinds of ways. We find and build our power in each other. This is what our power is all of us out on the street. But not necessarily out on the street in other places, but I'll get to that. Capital has more money than us, and it controls ours. The police will defend Capital's interests and not ours. The monopoly of force favors them. But there are also fewer of them than there are of us. Most people are subject to the power of Capital, like all of us in this room. Probably. So the project then is to organize the disparate group of us into an organized force that can contest them. There are more of us than there are of them. There are. So what does it take to move from the many diverse and dispersed individuals into something dense that can contest the organized power of Capital? We have to organize ourselves. So I pulled this out. The graduate students won a union at the University of Chicago a few months ago. It was very inspiring. And this image, I'm a really good girl, and I've been like a really good girl my whole life. And the only thing I ever did that was bad ever in high school, aside from staying out until 11 at a Denny's one time, which made my mom really mad, is I had this like much cooler friend, and we went and we spray painted this image on a building out in the hills of the foothills of Boise. And yeah, I felt like really bad. But this, I think it captures the essence of what I think our power is. Organized together, we can eat that bigger fish, right? So that's my analysis of power, brief though it is. It's us together pushing harder for the things in the world that we want because we're pushing together. And what comes next, and this is I think the hardest part, is trying to figure out how to organize that force. It's easier for Capital to do it. They have access to more resources than we do, and that includes time. Organizing is something that we have to do alongside our other work, and that other work increases exponentially the farther away we get from Capital. So I think of all the days that fill my day that Capital outsources. I earn wages by trading my time. I do laundry. I do dishes. I did both of those things yesterday. I make meals, I raise children, all of that reproductive labor that also takes time that we might otherwise spend building power. Capital hires all of that out, makes its money by its money, right? Doesn't have to do anything. So we can't forget that capital is organized and much more tightly than we are. So I'm going to offer a practical tip for getting organized. It begins with knowing who we are. In union work, we talk about the unit. Who's in the unit? Are you in the unit or are you out of the unit? In the LIU Brooklyn labor context, the unit's faculty, full and part-time. Outside of that technical definition, my unit is the set of interested parties who share with me a demand, and one that requires us to use our power against some other force in order to get what we want. During the lockout, that sense of unit was first my colleagues in the library. We are hardcore. We don't cross the line. We're out there every day. We call each other on the phone. Like we're, even people I don't like that I work with, we are rock solid on the line. And then my teaching colleagues, both full and part-time, and then more broadly, librarians and higher ed faculty elsewhere. And after that, I think the unit consists of everyone who wants to transfer resources from the people who control 99% of it to the rest of us. That's really big and unwieldy, and I do think organizing benefits from defining the context a little more narrowly. But more on that in a minute. In other contexts, you might define the us as people who use your library. It's the people who you think will work against you wherever capital aggregates and sediments itself. People who want to fight against prisons and jails, ICE deportations, nuclear arms, coal production. We have to think about who's in our unit. So once you've defined the boundaries of your unit, you have to actually literally write down who they are and how to find them. So this is my slide of how we fought back, right? How many of you make a list? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this is maybe not news to you, but I think it's worth talking about more openly. Making and keeping a list was news to me. I think we know everyone we work with, but we don't. You only know the people that you know, and during the lockout, we had to know everybody. So we used a list of dues-paying members as the starting point for figuring out who we were. We made a spreadsheet that included everyone's name, and then we added everything that mattered in the context of the lockout struggle about each of these people. Their phone number and email address, whether they were full or part-time, their academic department. And as we went along, I used my list to record every single interaction I had with every single member of the unit. This helped me get to know my unit a little better. I really appreciated Jeannie's, where's Jeannie? She left. Okay, Jeannie's talk earlier this morning where she went through, oh, you're standing right there. Jenny. I appreciated how you went step by step through how you actually do the fighting back, because I don't think we talk about that enough. Like, we get case studies up the wazoo about how to measure your learning outcome, but like, could we get some case studies about how you make a change like this? So remember, what we're after is a dense formation of disparate individuals who can be deployed to fight back against the organized power of capital. It sounds lofty, but the way we do that is by literally pulling people together in a list and then using the list to get people to show up at an action, a rally, a contract vote, a sticker day. We don't want to hope people will show up on the picket line. We want to know who will, and we want to know who they can bring with them. And this, for me, has been a central insight into organizing for power, one that you can read about in the book No Shortcuts. Have people read that book? Great book, totally essential book, which everyone should go borrow from your library and read. We make lists in order to make power, and we test our power by using our list to see what people are ready to do. So here's an example. During the lockout, we held an unemployment sign-up fair. This was an action designed with us, not for us, by the American Federation of Teachers, our national union. We invited the press to come. We wanted to show both that we were taking very seriously the fact of our unemployment, right? We were during that, and we were, because I think it's important to remember that during the event, you don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. So we didn't know if we'd be out for months, for a year, forever. As a total aside, this woman in the middle here, she's an athletic trainer for the Knicks dancers, halftime dancers. Anyway, that's her side gig. Anyway, so we wanted to show that we were a force. It wasn't just a few of us showing up for the event, but that we were still tightly bound together as a group. And we would be acting together. So when signing up for unemployment, we'd be together, and when we shut down the university, we'd be together in both cases. So we did that by calling each other, by using our lists of phone numbers. So by then, we'd been working our list for a while. We'd gotten to know each other, who was in the unit. We'd begun to find leaders. Chris Brooks, who's an organizer at Labor Notes, another organization everybody here should join, and whose books you should buy, introduced me to this definition of leadership, which I found very compelling. A leader is someone other people follow. That's it. So we knew that if we could get Kathleen from nursing to show up, she'd bring the rest of the nurses. Where John went, the rest of the social sciences followed, right? And people, you just have to find that keystone person, and then you make sure that you mark it down in the list. We also knew who our reliable workers were. Not everybody wants to make the list. Not everybody wants to call everybody. I have 5 minutes. Okay. Not everybody wants to call. We also knew who our reliable workers are. Not everybody wants to work. Not everybody's a doer, right? John's a leader, but he's not a doer. He'll come and bring everybody with him, but he's not going to call people on the phone, right? So I'm sure you know this from your libraries. There are people willing to do things and other people who won't. And when time is limited, you have to concentrate on the doers. I'm a doer. Eamon's a doer. Maybe you're a doer. So we had our doers making phone calls. We had our leaders committing to come and bring their people. And every time we made a call, we marked it down on our spreadsheet. Every time someone hung up on us, we marked it down on our spreadsheet. Every time someone asked if they could call their colleagues, we marked it down on our spreadsheet. And we used the list to tell us the shape of our power. So to return to the unemployment sign-up fair, we had about 100 people, which is about how many people we knew would show up. When your list is good, you're not going to be surprised, right? We have about 400 people in the unit. About 200 had shown up for the contract vote. This was half of that. That number also told us something about how dense our power was and how long we could expect it to carry over the course of staying locked out. The other thing that happened that day while the librarians were helping the rest of the faculty navigate the Department of Unemployment website, right? It ended up just being the librarians showing people how to use a drop-down menu. We're great at that. We got a call from somebody that the students were walking out of their classes in protest against $10 an hour scabs teaching from incomprehensible syllabi that management had handed out. The faculty, here we are, assembled en masse at a coffee shop a few blocks away, signing up for unemployment. We had a force in that moment, about 100 people strong, and we rose up as a single unit and marched to the campus to join those students in one of the most inspiring and meaningful and well-covered events of the lockout struggle. It was not spontaneous, right? So this turns to that. And what I think is important to remember is that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because you've organized and you can get people out in a moment like this. I didn't walk over to the campus. I find crowds really terrible. So I stayed back at the coffee shop and I updated our list. Jane McAlevey talks about actions in any struggle as tests of power. Very rarely will an action be an end in itself. How would we know if the revolution had happened? How will we know when we've won? The struggles we find ourselves in are long. They started long before us and will continue long after. And along the way, there will be tests. And those tests, they need to be monitored and tracked in a spreadsheet. Who showed up to an event when they said they would, who wore a t-shirt on the day we decided to wear t-shirts, who signed the petition, who agreed to bring snacks to the event and then brought snacks to the event. This is building power. It's knowing who we are, who we can count on to do that, becoming dense, becoming an organized counter to capital. And then there will be big moments when we deploy each other, when we will use our list to know whether we're ready to strike or whether it is best to retreat and restructure. So this is my big, bold claim, that power starts with accounting for people and accounting for their relationships to each other, and then starting from there, listening to each other, talking to each other, pulling in more people, and building more relationships. I'd also like to suggest that this is the work that librarians do, work that we're all quite skilled at. You know, they have that saying that libraries work because we do, and I think that's really true. And the kind of material work it takes to make this is the same exact kind of material work it takes to make the instruction calendar. How many of you are making the instruction calendar this week? Yeah, right? It's the same thing as organizing towards a job action. So I think what deserves our awe, and I also had read Fobazi's article that Barbara talked about yesterday, what deserves our awe is less our values, I think, than our capacity for work and our capacity for organization, for taking the minutes, for sending the emails, following up with a phone call, then sending another email, for showing up at the meeting if that's what it takes to get you to give me a date for your instruction session. And it's our capacity for maintaining calendars, and yes, for making and keeping the list. Where libraries do fulfill the promise of our professional core values and Bill of Rights, I think we do so through our quotidian work. That kind of labor is what constitutes the vast majority of my days, and perhaps most of your days too. So I think in the same ways that we make the library through our work, we can make the world the kind of place we want to be through that kind of work, just conversation by conversation. So I'll end there and hope that in the Q&A, I'd actually welcome comments that aren't questions, and I'd love to hear from you guys I'm trying to get guys out of my language, it's really hard. I'd be interested in hearing from you all what kind of work you're doing in your own places of work to organize, build, claim, and deploy power so that we can begin to imagine more and stronger ways to do that with each other. So I'll end there.
Great. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. So anybody got any?
Thank you for a wonderful talk, Emily. I was wondering if you could expand on something. There was in your spreadsheet slide, there was a series of numbers between 1 and 5. Could you tell us more about that and what those numbers mean?
I like when someone asks a question they know the answer to, but they're going to let me answer. So these are assessments, right? So you're always organizing towards a demand, like I want people, this is my assessment from the contract vote. I wanted us to vote to sign the contract for a long set of reasons. Yeah, it still pains me. But anyway, I assessed our power and thought we are not ready to strike, and therefore we have to sign this contract before it's imposed on us along with the elimination of our unit. Who's going to vote with me? So the assessments you have between 1 and 5. Ones are people who share your position and are organizing towards it, right? So I'm a 1. 5s are people who are on the other side of the issue. They want the other opposite thing to happen, and they're organizing for it. Michael is a 5. Like, I think when I thought about the contract vote, I was like, it's a contract vote, but it's really me against Michael. It's the 1 versus the 5. Are there going to be more 5s or more 1s? And when I was done with my spreadsheet, we were a lot of 1s and 2s. 3s are people who could go either way. And then when I'm doing my organizing to try to get people to come with me, which is more about listening to them than it is about talking to them, right? I focus on the 2s, 3s, and 4s. I'm never going to win Michael over, and he's never going to win me over. And we can't even talk about, like, what time the next meeting is without getting in a fight, you know? But I got to and my 2s I feel pretty solid about. I know they're going to vote with me. But I got to make sure my 3s, I want to move them to a 2, so I know they'll be with me. And my 4s, I want to move them to a 3, at least make them ask a question when they go in to sign the ballot. So that's, like, those kind of practical skills, more of us need them. Yeah.
Since you asked for comments, a thing I've learned in organizing people for the labor group is that if you have a whole bunch of people, you ask them to do a thing and a certain number will show up. And that's where you really start from. So again, it just really carries over to everything. You ask people, they show up, you break it out into small things. Okay, everybody go do this. They do it. It's magic. It's amazing. People are amazing.
People want to do things, right? I think one of the best things you can do is give somebody something to do.
I just want to say that I wasn't able to really emphasize that I organized students of, like Latino students, people who were really nervous about going out to the bandstand. But I also thought it was really important to, in the grand scheme of things, when you're going out into these really charged, I made a point to have snacks and stuff like that. I was a total mom, but I also demystified what was happening. And so they sort of, the students were like, why are these people wearing masks? Well, that's Antifa, and this is what Antifa does. And who are these people coming and taking pictures? Well, they're doxing people, and that's why Antifa's wearing. So, I definitely tried to, demystify the, protest so that it was, less scary and more involved. So I think demystifying, what it takes to organize is really, it makes it easier for people to be like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. Because I think that there's a barrier saying no, I can't do that. It seems really intimidating, but also making it being no, well, you don't have to be out and punching people in the faces, but you can go out and bring snacks, right? So so understanding people's strengths and really bringing it in, I don't know, that was just my statement.
One thing I'd say about that too is scale, right? You don't have to actually bring down capitalism, right? What you need to do is bring 5 people to this event tomorrow who didn't come before, right? So the scale of things to just ramp it down.
Great talk. I want to recommend the McAlevey book as well. It's fantastic. And I guess sort of as your reflection from your experience, I'd just be curious to hear your perspective on this distinction she makes between organizing and mobilizing. And maybe what that might be. And I mean, that's organizing is sort of talking people, I think as she defines it, sort of bringing people to a position, and mobilizing is just getting a lot of people to something. So the question is building power, and maybe I'd just be curious to hear your kind of reflections on what worked in terms of organizing is building long-term power from your experience.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, right? Like I would make this maybe mobilizing for opposition next time. I mean, I don't have so much to say about the McAlevey distinction, but the like organizing for long-term power, I don't know. You know, like it's really hard. It's really hard, right, Eamon? I mean, we signed this contract. It's very easy to organize when this is going to happen a lot. But like right now, this isn't happening a lot. Like we signed a contract, we're not going to vote on another contract for like 4 years, right? And so this, I think, lost in some ways the fight because we didn't stay organized, or we didn't stay mobilized between contract years. So I think it's a lot about, can you articulate demands consistently enough that keep people engaged enough with the union and feeling like the union is theirs, you know, not even feeling like the union is theirs, but acting and behaving in like as the union is theirs, like as it actually is in real life. Like even just today, I've heard a lot of conversations about how like, oh, it's not a very good union. I'm like, you're the union, you know, like you have something to do with that, like whether it is good or not, but it's very hard because it's very thankless. Like we went through this big, huge fight and like it was sad and hard and terrible. And internally, you know, it's like there's a lot of bad feeling, and management continues to be terrible, and like so I think mobilizing has to be about defining demands, getting something, defining wins that you can getting those wins, counting up those wins, making sure that everyone is aware of them. But it's been a year of retrenchment and grief for us, so I don't have a better answer than that.
Time for one more.
Thanks, Emily. It was a great talk. And your talk plus Roxanne's made me realize that, you know, as we think about perhaps how library labor is undervalued in academia, community organizing labor tends to be undervalued across society. And it's definitely not training that we get in library school, but there are training and experts and people out there that know how to do this. Yeah. And there are, I know like Metro is having a bystander training here next week. It seems like a really great professional development opportunity for all of us to learn these skills because they are so relevant to our work.
Okay, but can I say something to that? Like Eamon and I tried to put one of those on, and like 4 people signed up because the truth is that you don't want to learn those skills until you have to, or they don't seem relevant to you, you know, until you need them, or you got those skills somewhere else doing movement work, and now like my work's not going to pay for me to learn how to like resist it, right? So I think, and it's hard because I've talked about, I never went to a union panel before I had a union like struggle, you know, because it's like organized labor doesn't feel relevant until it does. And even now, you know, we had our first union meeting post contract signing, and like 40 people showed up. I have a list of them, you know, but it was only 40 of them, which is, you know, a drop by 120 of who came to the contract meeting. And so there's a sustaining that, like that mobilizing thing, sustaining interest and engagement is really hard to do. Yeah, but I totally agree with you that there's expertise, and this doesn't happen by accident. Some people know how to do that.
Thanks so much, Emily. Well, one thing I thought about when you were talking, especially like that the union is us, and like Roxanne was saying, like the library isn't, you know, the library is us. One thing that really helps me is, especially when thinking about like institutions, like that we're like, and somehow in like this constant tension with our institution, which we are in many ways, but that the institution like is us. Sarah Ahmed has done some great work on this, and keeping that in mind, it actually like really helps me, like when I'm feeling grief and or feeling powerless, when I remember that, it's, you know, I feel like that, I don't know, it's been helpful for me, so just wanted to put that out there.